The millionaire's son wouldn't eat with the nannies, but opened his mouth for this maid. Morning mist drifted over Los Angeles, wrapping the hills in a pale haze. Along the road leading up to Beverly Hills, a sleek black car rolled quietly. Andrew Miller sat behind the wheel, his face hollow, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. In the back seat, the baby carrier was empty. He had just taken his 8-month-old son, Lucas, to the hospital again. The doctor's words still echoed in his head. If the baby keeps refusing to eat, there's nothing more we can do. Andrew steered toward the hilltop mansion. The house, once home, now carried the stillness of a tomb. Ever since Valerie, his beloved wife, died giving birth, something inside him had died too. In the vast kitchen, Lucas's cries filled the air. Another nanny was trying to feed him, spoon by spoon, but the child turned away, wailing until his tiny face turned red. Andrew stood there, exhausted and helpless. "Sir, I've tried everything," the nanny said shakily. "He won't eat." Andrew closed his eyes, took a long breath, and said hoarsely, "Thank you. You may pack your things and leave." That was the 10th nanny he had fired in 2 months. At the far end of the kitchen, Grace Alvarez, the young Latina housekeeper, quietly wiped the counter. She had seen everything, the pain, the frustration, the hollow eyes of a father losing hope. When the nanny left, Grace hesitated, then stepped forward. "Mr. Miller," she began softly. "May I try?" Andrew turned, frowning. "You? You're not a nurse, not even a trained nanny." "I know," Grace said gently, lowering her eyes. "But I raised 7 siblings back home. Maybe I understand babies a little." Silence. Lucas's cries grew louder. Andrew sighed, then nodded. Grace washed her hands and carefully lifted the baby into her arms. She said nothing. Instead, she began to hum. "Duérmete, mi niño, duérmete, mi sol." The soft lullaby floated through the kitchen, warm, tender, like a mother's heartbeat. Lucas stopped crying. His eyes widened, curious. Grace kept singing and slowly brought the spoon to his lips. For the first time in over 3 weeks, Lucas opened his mouth. 1 spoon, then another. Andrew froze, hardly breathing, watching his son eat, as if witnessing a miracle. When Lucas finally drifted to sleep in Grace's arms, Andrew stood there, tears sliding down his face. "Thank you," he whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know how to repay you." Grace smiled gently. "He doesn't need anyone perfect, sir, just someone who truly cares." That morning, Andrew Miller didn't just see his son saved. He saw a flicker of light spark back to life in a world he thought had gone dark forever. That afternoon, soft sunlight filtered through the kitchen window. Andrew sat quietly on a wooden chair, his gaze fixed on the crib where Grace held little Lucas, fast asleep in her arms. Everything felt like a dream. Just hours ago, he had feared losing his son forever. Grace laid the baby down gently, tucking the blanket around him. She turned back to Andrew with a calm, warm smile. "He's asleep," she whispered. Andrew nodded. "I still don't understand. How did you make him eat?" Grace smiled modestly. "There's no secret, sir. Babies feel fear. When we're scared, they're scared. But when we love them, they feel safe." Her words struck him silent. Andrew realized that ever since Valerie's death, he hadn't just lost his wife. He'd lost himself. He had been breathing, moving, but not living. And somehow, his son had felt that emptiness. "You should work at a children's hospital," he said softly, half joking, half sincere. "They'd call you a miracle." Grace laughed quietly, shaking her head. "I'm no miracle, Mr. Miller. I just know how to sing and believe that love can heal anything." Andrew looked at her, a mix of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. No pretense, no agenda, just simple kindness. As Grace started to leave, Andrew spoke up. "Grace, I want to hire you as Lucas's full-time nanny. I'll pay you double what you earn now." She paused, thinking, then said softly, "I'll accept, but on one condition." Andrew raised a brow. "What condition?" "That you start healing yourself, too. Lucas needs a father, not a lost soul." He didn't reply right away. Her words pierced straight through the armor he had built around his grief. Finally, Andrew nodded. "I'll try." Grace's gentle smile widened. For the first time in months, the house no longer felt dead. It felt alive again. The next morning, Grace began her new routine. She replaced the heavy curtains with light ones, opened the windows to let the sunlight in, cooked breakfast that filled the halls with warmth, and played soft classical music. Lucas watched her every move, giggling when she sang. From the staircase, Andrew stood watching quietly. In the soft morning light, he realized something profound. Grace wasn't just feeding his son, she was nourishing his soul. Within weeks, the mansion on the hill no longer felt like a silent tomb. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows, carrying the smell of pancakes and the soft hum of music mixed with the laughter of a child. Grace had brought life back to Andrew Miller's home. She opened every curtain, let the wind in, placed small flower pots on the windowsills, and sometimes left a warm cup of coffee on Andrew's desk without saying a word. One morning, as Andrew reviewed blueprints for a new project, little Lucas crawled toward him, grabbing the edge of his pants, babbling nonsense. Grace stood behind them, smiling. "It seems he wants to play with his dad more than he wants you to work," she said warmly. Andrew laughed, a genuine laugh, the first in months. He lifted his son into his arms. "Looks like it. My boy's got good taste in company." Grace just smiled, and that smile eased something heavy inside him. Over the next few days, Andrew began to change. He shortened his work hours, came home early for dinner. Grace cooked simple but flavorful meals: Mexican-style chicken rice, gentle herb soup, light vanilla pudding. Slowly, Andrew realized he wasn't just learning how to be a father again. He was learning how to live again. One quiet evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, the house glowed softly under warm yellow light. Andrew walked into the kitchen and found Grace reading by herself, her voice low and rhythmic. "You're still up?" he asked. She looked up with a small smile. "I like to read a few pages before bed. It helps me find peace." He nodded, sitting across from her. "It's strange. This house used to suffocate me. Now it's quiet, but it doesn't feel lonely anymore." Grace met his eyes. "Sometimes what we need isn't silence, it's peace." Her words lingered in the air. Andrew looked around, noticing the little details he had ignored for so long: the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the light reflected in a glass of water, the faint scent of lavender drifting from Lucas's room. Everything bore her touch. She had arrived quietly, without noise or pride, and day by day she was healing everything: the baby, the house, and the broken man within it. That night, as Andrew walked down the hall toward his room, he saw Grace closing Lucas's door softly after checking his blanket. Their eyes met. No words, only a small smile. Yet in that fleeting moment, Andrew knew. Something inside him was changing. Something tender, fragile, and terrifyingly real was beginning to grow. The following weeks passed in quiet peace. Andrew slowly began to find himself again, and Grace became the heartbeat of the house. Gentle, diligent, yet always keeping a respectful distance. In the mornings, Lucas's laughter filled the sunlit rooms. At night, soft music lulled Andrew to sleep. Sometimes he wondered, was she sent here to save us? But he never dared to say it aloud. Everything seemed almost too perfect until the outside world began to notice. It started with a flash. A single photo taken by a paparazzo hiding behind the garden hedge. In the picture, Andrew was holding Lucas, his head bent tenderly toward the child, while Grace stood beside them, smiling. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, a gesture pure in meaning, but powerful enough to spark whispers. Within hours, the photo spread online. The billionaire and the housekeeper, love behind the mansion gates? What had been a private, quiet life turned into headlines, comments, and judgment. In Beverly Hills, rumors travel faster than truth, and once they start, they burn. Andrew saw it first on his phone. He stared at the image for a long time, not angry, not ashamed, just tired. Because he knew how cruel silence could be when the world had already decided your story. He's seeing his housekeeper. She's probably after his money. They say she lives in his house like she already owns it. Andrew heard the whispers but stayed silent. He didn't deny or explain. He thought that as long as he and Grace knew the truth, nothing else mattered. He was wrong. Rumors don't die in silence, they grow stronger in it. One afternoon, as Andrew played with Lucas in the garden, the sharp sound of heels echoed from the gate. Margaret Miller, his mother, appeared. Dressed elegantly, chin high, she surveyed the place as if entering a foreign land. "You've truly disappointed me, Andrew," she said, her voice cold. "Your housekeeper is all over the tabloids. The company is buzzing with gossip." Andrew rose, holding Lucas in his arms. "I have nothing to be ashamed of, Mother. Grace saved my son." Margaret frowned. "Saved him? You're confusing gratitude with affection. Can't you see? She's using you." "She isn't," Andrew said quietly but firmly. "Isn't she?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Grace, where are you?" Grace stepped out from the porch, still holding a dish towel. She paused, then greeted politely. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller." Margaret's gaze was sharp and disdainful. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're turning my son into a laughingstock." Grace took a slow breath, her tone calm and steady. "I never meant to cause trouble, ma'am. I'm simply doing my job and loving this little boy as if he were my own." Margaret let out a cold, short laugh. "Love? Do you really think love is enough to cross the gap between you and us?" Grace lifted her chin, eyes gentle but unwavering. "I don't know much about gaps, Mrs. Miller. I only know there are children who need love, and adults who've forgotten how to give it." Silence fell. Margaret's hand tightened around her purse. For a brief moment, something flickered in her expression. Andrew stepped forward, standing between them. "Mother, I know what you're thinking, but Grace hasn't used anyone. She did what doctors, specialists, and nannies couldn't. She kept my son alive." Margaret's voice softened, hurt seeping through her pride. "So you're choosing her over your family?" Andrew replied quietly. "I'm choosing what's real, Mother." Margaret turned without another word, her heels clicking away like the final notes of a sad song. Grace stood frozen, eyes glistening. Andrew moved closer, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry for what she said." Grace shook her head. "Don't be. I understand her fear, the fear of losing something she thought would last forever." Andrew looked at her, a quiet admiration filling his chest. For the first time, he realized that true strength doesn't come from power or status. It comes from loving without needing approval. And in that still, windless afternoon, Andrew knew one undeniable truth. His heart was no longer his own. After that confrontation, the mansion fell into silence. Margaret left, but her harsh words lingered in the air like scratches on everyone's heart. Andrew stood by the window for a long time, staring into the darkening garden. The wind swayed the branches, carrying the sounds of the night and an emptiness he couldn't name. In the kitchen, Grace quietly cleaned up. Neither of them spoke, yet the silence between them was full of things they couldn't say. From that day, Andrew barely left the house. He spent more time with Lucas, and each time he saw Grace holding his son, he felt both gratitude and guilt. He wanted to protect her from the gossip, but he still wasn't strong enough to face the world. Then, one September night, as rain began to fall over Los Angeles, fate knocked again. Not with words, but with the terrified cry of a child in the dark. The first autumn storm hit Los Angeles that September night. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howled through the garden. Inside the mansion, Grace suddenly heard Lucas crying uncontrollably from the nursery. She rushed in, touched his forehead. It was burning hot. His breath was shallow, his skin pale. Panic filled her voice. "Mr. Miller, Lucas has a terrible fever." Andrew ran in, heart pounding, as he saw his son trembling in the blanket. He scooped the baby into his arms, his hands shaking. "We need the hospital, now," he said, voice breaking. They raced into the storm. The streets were empty, rain slashing across the windshield, blurring the lights. Andrew drove in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, tears mixing with the rain. At the hospital, doctors rushed Lucas into the emergency room. The door shut, leaving Andrew and Grace alone in the corridor. He sank onto a bench, burying his face in his hands, trembling. Grace sat beside him, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He's going to be fine, Mr. Miller." He shook his head, voice trembling. "I can't lose anyone else. I can't survive that again." Grace looked at him, her voice calm but firm. "You haven't lost anyone. He'll make it, and you're not alone." In that cold, sterile hallway, Andrew lifted his gaze to hers. No words were needed. The truth was there. He needed her more than he'd ever admit. A cry echoed from inside the room, followed by the doctor's voice. "Parents, he's stable now? The fever's breaking." They both jumped to their feet. Inside, Lucas lay asleep, color returning to his cheeks. Tears streamed down Andrew's face as he sank beside the crib, holding his son's tiny hand. Grace stood behind him, resting her hand on his shoulder. Andrew turned toward her, eyes red and wet. "I owe you, not just my son's life, but my own." Grace shook her head, smiling through tears. "You don't owe me anything, Andrew. We're just learning how to love again, in a different way." He looked at her for a long moment, and then, under the dim hospital light, with the storm raging outside and the heartbeat monitor beeping softly, Andrew pulled her into his arms. They didn't kiss, only held on. Slow, real and trembling, as if the storm outside needed a harbor. The embrace of two broken souls finding each other in the middle of the storm. As Lucas stirred in his sleep, Andrew whispered against Grace's ear, "Thank you for not leaving." Her voice quivered as she answered, "I never will, because this is my home too." Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside that room, the air was warm again. A new beginning was quietly born, built from love, trust, and a kiss that didn't need to happen to already exist in both their hearts. After that stormy night, Andrew and Grace grew closer than ever. They never said the words, "I love you," but every glance, every gesture spoke for them. Lucas recovered quickly, and in the sound of his laughter, they found a peace they thought was gone forever. But peace, as always, doesn't last. One morning at the office, Daniel, Andrew's younger brother, walked in with a serious expression and a magazine in hand. "You should see this," he said, placing it on the desk. On the cover was a photo of Andrew holding Lucas, Grace beside him, her hand gently on his shoulder. The headline screamed, "From Mansion to Heart, the Billionaire CEO and His Housekeeper." Andrew stared at it silently. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid, just sad. He knew this day would come. His phone rang. It was Margaret. Her voice was cold, sharp as glass. "Are you trying to turn our family into gossip fodder? End this, or I'll pull every share you own from the company." Andrew's voice was calm but steady. "I can't, Mother, because she isn't a mistake. She's the reason we're still standing." There was silence, then the click of disconnection, cold and final. That afternoon, Grace noticed the change. Strange looks at the grocery store, whispers behind her back. Everyone had read the article. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. The screen became a window of voices that didn't know her. Hundreds of them. When Andrew returned home, he found her packing. "Where are you going?" he asked, fear tightening his throat. She turned, eyes wet with tears. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. I'm used to being poor, but I can't bear watching you get hurt because of me." Andrew stepped closer, holding her hands tightly. "Don't you see? You didn't destroy my life. You saved it. And if there's a price, I'm willing to pay it." Grace shook her head, forcing a tearful smile. "You can't fight the whole world, Andrew." He looked at her, eyes steady, voice low but sure. "I don't need to fight the world. I just need to stand beside the one person I know is right." Tears fell freely as Grace collapsed into his arms. This time, there was no fear. In the same room where rain once echoed, they kissed. No more hesitation, no more hiding. It was the kiss of two souls who had lost too much and finally chose to live truthfully, no matter the cost. Outside, the Los Angeles sky began to clear after days of gray. And in that soft morning light, Andrew understood. This wasn't a fight against the world anymore. It was a fight to protect the only thing that ever truly mattered: love. A week later, the rumors hadn't stopped. Online, Andrew Miller and Grace Alvarez were still trending. The headlines called them the forbidden love story of the elite. Andrew was exhausted, but for the first time, he wasn't hiding. He knew it was time to tell the truth. A close friend who owned a TV network offered to host a live interview to set the record straight. Andrew hesitated, but Grace nodded. "If we don't tell our story, someone else will, and they'll get it wrong." The interview took place in their home on the hill, bathed in soft afternoon light. Andrew sat beside Grace, his hand brushing lightly against hers, a small gesture that spoke of unity. The host began. "Your story has caused quite a stir. Mr. Miller, can you tell the public what's really true?" Andrew took a deep breath, meeting the camera head-on. "The truth is, I lost my wife when my son was born. I was broken. My baby was dying because he refused to eat. When everyone else gave up, Grace saved him. She didn't just feed my son, she saved my heart." Grace lowered her gaze, voice trembling softly. "I didn't do anything special. I only did what any mother would do: love a child." The room fell silent. No one saw a housekeeper anymore, only a woman made of quiet strength and unadorned sincerity. The host asked, "And now, facing all the criticism, how do you feel?" Andrew tightened his grip on Grace's hand. "Love doesn't need approval. It just needs to be real. We're not perfect, but we're honest." The interview aired that evening during prime time. Millions watched. Online comments began to shift. "I cried hearing their story. She's a good woman. Everyone deserves a second chance at love." The next morning, the front gate overflowed with flowers. No more hateful notes, just cards that read, "Thank you for reminding us to believe in love." Standing on the porch, Andrew held Grace's hand. Peace glimmered in his eyes, something he hadn't felt in years. "You see," he whispered, "when the truth is spoken, it finds its own way to survive." Grace smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I only know this: when love is real, the world eventually understands." After that interview, the mansion on the hill finally returned to a rare, gentle calm. No more cameras watching, no more gossiping voices. Only sunlight filtering through the windows, Lucas's laughter, and the faint smell of morning coffee drifting in the breeze. Andrew sat on the porch, watching Grace play with their son in the lavender garden. The sight made him realize that happiness isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't need to be proven. It simply exists in the quiet moment when you see the person you love smile. Margaret visited sometimes, bringing pastries for Lucas. She never apologized, but her eyes had softened. The walls between them were slowly fading, one gentle day at a time. That night, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Andrew sat in the kitchen, staring at the chair where Grace usually read her books. A small smile touched his lips. In his chest, a thought rose, light as a whisper, steady as a heartbeat. It's time to say what my heart has been holding all along. The morning sun bathed Los Angeles in golden light. In the kitchen, filled with the smell of fresh pastry, Grace stood at the counter, wearing an apron, laughing as Lucas ran around with a wooden spoon. "Are you helping me or ruining the batter?" she teased, ruffling his hair. Andrew walked in, holding a bouquet of white daisies. He paused, just watching. The sight was simple, yet it made his chest tighten. For so long, he believed he'd never love again, and now love was right there in front of him, honest, warm, and real. Grace turned, surprised to see him. "You're home early?" Andrew didn't answer. He placed the flowers on the table and stepped closer. Morning light fell across his face, calm, tender, full of emotion. Then he knelt down, right there among the scent of flower and the sound of a child's laughter. "Grace Alvarez," he said softly, voice trembling. "Thank you for saving my son and for saving me. I once thought happiness was something lost, but you showed me that family isn't what we have. It's who we choose to love, and I choose you. Will you marry me?" Grace froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. Lucas giggled as if he understood. She nodded, whispering through her tears, "Yes, Andrew, I will." He rose and wrapped her in his arms. In that moment, the kitchen became the most sacred place in the world. Months later, the wedding took place in the garden behind the mansion. It wasn't lavish or grand, just family, close friends, and soft guitar music in the air. Margaret arrived. She still carried her dignified poise, but her eyes were gentler. When she reached Grace, she spoke quietly. "I was wrong about you, but today, seeing Lucas smile, I understand. You brought something money can't buy. Welcome to our family." Grace took her hand, eyes glistening. Andrew watched from nearby, smiling, the smile of a man who had regained both love and faith. When the music began, Grace walked down the aisle lined with white flowers, her simple dress fluttering in the breeze. Lucas led the way, clutching the tiny rings. Someone in the crowd began to cry, and soon everyone was applauding. Their vows echoed under the setting sun. "I promise to love you, not only on the easy days, but through every storm. You turned this empty house into a home, and my heart into the place where you'll always belong." Grace answered, her voice shaking but sure. "I don't promise to be perfect, but I promise to keep choosing you, every day, with all my heart." They exchanged rings and kissed as cheers and music filled the air. White petals fell around them, Lucas hugging their legs, laughing. In that moment, the past faded away. There was only now, and a love that had conquered judgment, grief, and fear to become something truly beautiful. After the wedding, the garden behind the mansion still carried the scent of white flowers and the echo of gentle music. The string lights hung from the trees swayed softly in the night breeze, as if holding on to the memory of their happiest day. Andrew and Grace stood together on the porch, hands intertwined, watching the last guests leave. Lucas was asleep upstairs, his rosy cheeks glowing after a long day of laughter. "It's so quiet," Grace whispered. Andrew smiled. "Peace has never looked this beautiful." She rested her head on his shoulder. In their hearts, there was no more fear, no more hiding, only the quiet certainty that this was home. The days that followed passed gently and slow. Mornings were filled with Lucas's laughter, afternoons with sunlight spilling across the kitchen table, and evenings with long embraces that spoke of love in the simplest way. And then, one small but miraculous piece of news arrived, the kind of news that made everything feel complete. Spring arrived early in Los Angeles. In the small garden behind their house, lavender bloomed in full purple. Grace sat on a wooden chair, her hand resting on her round belly, now carrying new life. Morning light touched her face, softening her smile. Andrew stepped out of the house, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. He placed one on the table and gently touched her shoulder. "How do you feel?" Grace smiled. "A little tired, but happy." Lucas ran toward them, carrying a small bunch of flowers. "For you and the baby, Mommy," he cheered, placing the bouquet on her belly and kissing it. Grace laughed through tears of joy. Andrew sat beside them, watching his wife and son with quiet peace. "I still can't believe I have all this," he said softly. Grace turned to him, touching his hand. "You didn't just have it, Andrew. We built it. Together." That afternoon, Margaret and Maria, Grace's mother, came to visit. 2 women from completely different worlds now sat side by side, sharing tea and laughter. Lucas ran around them, his giggles filling the garden. Margaret looked at Grace warmly. "I still remember the first time I met you and how wrong I was. If Valerie could see you now, she'd be smiling." Grace squeezed her hand gently. "I believe she already is, somewhere." As the sun began to set, the golden light spread across the garden, bathing their faces in peace. Andrew lifted Lucas onto his shoulders, Grace walking beside him, her hand on her belly, eyes on the horizon. "I used to think my life ended the day Valerie died," Andrew said quietly. "But it turned out to be the beginning of something else. The journey to learn how to love again, to believe again, to live again." Grace smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "And that journey was never yours alone." The breeze carried the scent of lavender and laughter. For a moment, time seemed to pause, leaving only the people they loved, the pain they'd survived, and the life they were building together. That night, before turning off the lights, Andrew tucked Lucas into bed, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You're the first miracle I was ever given." Then he turned to see Grace standing by the window, moonlight draping over her like a gentle halo. He walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her, and rested his hand on her belly, where a new heartbeat was growing. She smiled softly. "I think our daughter will have your eyes." He chuckled. "And your heart." Outside, the Los Angeles sky shimmered, calm after every storm. A new beginning had truly begun, not loud, not grand, but built on love, faith, and the quiet truth that even broken hearts can find each other and heal together. 1 year later, the mansion on the hill had changed. It was no longer a house of silence, but a home filled with laughter, life, and love. Lucas ran around the yard with a little dog Andrew had adopted, while Grace sat on the porch, cradling their baby girl, Valeria Hope Miller, a name that carried both memory and promise. The memory of Valerie and the hope of what was yet to come. Andrew stepped outside, holding a camera. "All right, Miller family, say cheese." Grace looked up, sunlight dancing on her face as Lucas ran to hug his father. The sound of the shutter clicked. Click! Capturing a moment that would live forever. That photo later hung in the living room. Beneath the frame, Andrew wrote a small inscription. "We were not broken. We were being rebuilt. That night, as the lights in the house slowly dimmed, the Los Angeles sky glittered with stars. Andrew and Grace sat by the window, quiet but content. "Do you ever wonder," Grace whispered, "what would have happened if I hadn't asked to feed Lucas that day?" Andrew smiled, gently squeezing her hand. "I think fate leaves a light on for lost hearts to meet." She smiled back, resting her head on his shoulder. Lucas slept soundly in his room, and Valeria breathed softly in her dreams. In that stillness, all the pain that once defined them faded away, leaving only love, gratitude, and the gentle light of a beginning that would never truly end.